So I would I would think that you would agree with me that it's abusive to demand that somebody accept something that is demonstrably untrue in all kinds of ways for no other reason than you if that's what you would do if you loved me. And that's the central theme I'm going to come back to here throughout all my Dragons of Victory content is the group that I'm no longer in, traditional Catholicism, and all high control groups, all cults, whatever term you want to use. I know cult is such a loaded word, but there's, high control group. I think high control religious group, I think fits the bill as well. You know, something that can be either that is either obvious or easily proven. But and to take that and to insist that the only way you can possibly love me is if you essentially humiliate yourself by publicly denying that which can be easily observed to be true as a way of testing your loyalty, as a way of testing your love. That is the issue I'm going to talk about today in terms of traditional Catholicism and science and the way they view the world in those terms. Because if you look at evangelical fundamentalist Christianity and you look at figures like Kent Hovind and Ken Ham, who represent that sort of strand of biblical literalism, where the first chapters of Genesis are literally true, which they can't be. Um, it, it, it scientifically they just can't be true, and that can be proven through the fossil record. It can be proven through the laws of cosmology and astronomy. But as we all know, fundamentalists, biblical literalist Christians, and traditional Catholics as well, um, their trust or their faith, and I think religious faith and trust I'll use sort of simultaneously or interchangeably here because I think the best way to describe religious faith for anyone out there who has no experience or lived experience of what it actually feels like to have, it's as if it's like there's definitely things that you believe that you're not sure why you do, but you have trust or you love the source, the thing, the church, the person, whoever. You love the person that's telling you this, because you have an understanding that this is God, this is divine entity, this is a God who loves me, and obviously he knows what he's talking about. He's an authority figure I should defer to. But so many, um, but the idea is that well, what's in Genesis, it can't be metaphor, it can't be open for interpretation. It can't be that it's not literally true. Because, of course, many Christians accept that it's not literally true. They think that there's some deeper meaning in there that God's trying to convey with metaphor or narrative. But there's the question of, well, who's going to interpret that? And the Catholic Church's interpretation of Genesis for the longest time was that it was literally true, and they took it to the extent of imprisoning and torturing Galileo when he thought they might be wrong, and burning Giordano Bruno at the stake, burning him alive because he challenged their teachings and their authority. I don't understand how unquestioned authority in any way computes with love. God's supposed to love me, right? What kind of loving, how how would a definition of love that would in any way be coherent include denying the obvious what can be clearly demonstrated, i.e., scientific truths that the earth is the Earth moves around the sun and the sun is still. We all evolved from a common ancestor, and that the universe was created in a big bang and it continues to expand. Traditional Catholics deny all that. They definitely deny evolution. They definitely deny the Big Bang and the expanding universe, even though a Catholic priest came up with the idea of the Big Bang. And there's a very common strain of geocentrism that runs through them, where they deny traditional Catholics. A great many of them openly deny the 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 heliocentric model of the universe. Um, and I have a belief that somebody's if somebody has a belief that that is crazy and just demonstrably untrue and false, but it's just something they're kind of keeping them to themselves. They're not imposing it on anyone. Just leave them alone, essentially. But if they're taking this wrong belief, this ridiculous belief, and they're imposing it by force on people, that's when you have the right to resist and absolutely mock and deride their beliefs. Demonstrate why it's wrong and why they shouldn't have it. If they're the kind of person who can't be trusted with their stupid belief that they're not going to try and impose it on others, then don't let them have it. That's the angle I come from on that. And Hegel, the philosopher, wrote that there's a quote of his that Bruno's life represented a bold rejection of all Catholic beliefs resting on mere authority. And that's the key issue with this denial of science that runs rampant throughout traditional Catholicism is authority for its own sake, authority alone. God created the church, and the church is perfect, and it can never get anything wrong. And they always have caveats. It can err in its human error. You can have bad people in there doing bad things, but the teachings will always be good because that comes from God. Well, for one, I don't see, with the sheer amount of horrific things the Catholic Church, in an officially sanctioned way, mind you, has done throughout its years. I, for one, find the idea of love incoherent if that's that's the kind of people that God left to rule over us, spiritually rule over us. And also, it's also incoherent to say that love in any kind of way would not respect the brain, would not respect the abilities of the individual they're loving, would force them, to deny the scientific method, which doesn't demand that you believe what it says. That traditional Catholics have this idea that, oh, it's the scientists are just like the religious figures. It's another religion, the scientific beliefs in evolution and the Big Bang and heliocentrism. It's all like their religious faith, but it's a completely different um, manner of approaching analysis, because the scientific method is constantly takes a thesis and constantly tries to disprove it. It's constantly battering it up with it's taking an idea and throwing all kinds of what about this, what about that, prove it, prove it, prove it, experiment. It's an extremely rigorous process, and that is designed to get us to as much certainty as we can possibly have. And that's the key here. We're humans, we're finite, we have limited capacity, but we do the best we can. And the scientific method is the best we can because there's no presupposition involved. But the presupposition built into uh, the the mindset of traditional Catholics is the unquestioned authority of the old church. And when the statements that authority makes are clearly contradicted by the evidence becomes evil. And again, it's all about the feeling of certainty, the feeling of knowing. We all have just an innate desire for stability and for and for equilibrium and balance and a sense of balance, but we need to also understand that we're all in that position. That we need to have sympathy for each other in recognizing that that's the position we're all in, rather than for whatever reason deciding that this group or this entity or this person, I'm just going to surrender my mind to theirs. And that's the horrific practice that runs throughout this group and other groups is um, unquestioning authority, which is unquestioned authority for its own sake, even when the the themes or the teachings of that authority is clearly contradicted by what you can see right in front of your face. So, conclusion here, my the thing that's made this whole thing tricky, like I've said before, is finding the distinction of attacking people's beliefs versus attacking people's actions. What I'm doing here is I'm attacking people's actions that are inspired by belief. If it's just a belief, if you just want to believe, if you're a person who is just quietly believing all these things about the old teachings of the Catholic Church, you know, okay. But what's dangerous is the the effort into action, the mobilization into enacting these beliefs throughout society, because they want us to go back to a society where we execute people for saying that the universe is expanding, where we execute or torture and imprison people for saying that the earth goes round the sun. It's not an exaggeration or hyperbole to say that that is the wor- that is that is the world that traditional Catholics envision. They talk about imposing the social reign of Christ the King. But if you look at the actual tradition of the Catholic Church that they'll point to, and you see these instances of torture and execution and death, all for the crime of pointing to something and saying, here it is. It's that is the world that they want. And that's why this is important. That's why talking about these things is important, because we all deserve to allow our own minds to go where they will and to come to the conclusions that we come to without coercion. But at the same time, we we have to we have to prove our conclusions beyond a reasonable doubt with the same burden of proof or standard of evidence that exists in the criminal justice system and within the scientific method as well. And if we don't approach these moral issues or these other issues with that kind of approach, we end up um, in a dystopian nightmare. And so you're entitled to the belief you have, but you're not entitled to imposing that belief on others. And we're talking about imposing things that we're talking about the imposition of ludicrous, ridiculous ideas about the way the world operates.